Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. By now, you have probably heard what happened on Saturday morning, May 17th, in Palm Springs, California. A man named Guy Edward Bartkus drove into the parking lot of an IVF clinic, the American Reproductive Center, and took his own life in a violent explosion. He died instantly, the clinic was severely damaged, and at least four innocent people nearby were injured. People who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The FBI has called it an act of terrorism. Soon, a website called promortalism.com surfaced. It laid out a confused manifesto explaining why he targeted the clinic. It also featured a 30-minute audio, a voice rambling, scattered, clearly hurting, trying to justify the unjustifiable. The website is now gone, the audio is also gone, and honestly, I think that's for the best. I saw it before it was taken down. I listened, I read, and what I saw wasn't just ideology, it was pain, grief, and confusion wrapped in philosophical words. Normally, I would show clips or screenshots to support what I say, but not this time. Not with this. Because this isn't just a story about ideas. It's a story about a man who lost his way and who took others down with him. In that video, he talked about five ideologies: negative utilitarianism, antinatalism, aphilism, pro-mortalism, and veganism. According to the FBI's Assistant Director Akil Davis, Bartkus had nihilistic ideations. And soon the word nihilism became the media's favorite explanation. The story spread fast to CNN, BBC, NBC News, MSNBC, everywhere. Many of them linked it to antinatalism and aphilism. And just like that, ideas meant to reduce suffering were now being framed as dangerous, even violent. Reddit banned the aphilism subreddit. Masahiro Morioka's academic paper, What is Antinatalism? Definition, History, and Categories, saw a sudden surge in downloads. On Twitter, some people even began pointing fingers at David Benatar. We are going to look at what David Benatar had to say on this issue later on. Catherine D., a digital journalist who studies fringe internet communities, had written about antinatalism before. Her essay on Unheard, We Need to Talk About Extreme Antinatalism, Child-Free Doomsters Believe Life is Suffering, was critical though thoughtful. Lawrence responded to it at the time, and so did I. But Catherine also covered this tragedy in a blog post titled, An Aphilist Just Bombed a Fertility Clinic. Was this bound to happen? The media storm hasn't settled, and none of it is a good news. Not for philosophy, not for activism, but more importantly, not for the people who were hurt. There were people who were injured. They could have been killed. Not abstract figures, not names in news ticker. Real people. They didn't deserve this. If your ethics are rooted in preventing suffering, they should be the first ones in your thoughts. Then there's this clinic itself. Yes, it deals with reproduction. Yes, you may disagree with what it does. But the staff, they were just people working a job, living their lives. They didn't sign up for this. For those two reasons alone, this act wasn't just wrong, it was horrifically, tragically, morally wrong. Most of the media has linked this to antinatalism and aphilism. Inmendum made an emergency video explaining why this has nothing to do with aphilism and him. As for antinatalism, which is where most of the media is pointing to, I must say that this is not antinatalism. Antinatalism is a certain position about the question of creating new sentient beings. It is a philosophical argumentation. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but it's not a call to blow up yourself in a parking lot. This act is not defensible, whether you are an antinatalist, pronatalist, or anti-antinatalist. Keep your philosophy and psychology separate. If you have psychological troubles, then seek help. Although human psychology plays a role in philosophical arguments, don't let the philosophy drive your psychology. That was actually what had happened in Bartkus's case. Catherine D. points out his turn toward violence seems not to have been because of aphilism, but because of grief. He had lost a close friend to suicide. That pain broke something in him. His drift towards what the media calls as fringe ideologies was his coping mechanism. Catherine notes the suicide of his closest friend cracked something open, and the ideology drifted in afterward, less a cause than a vocabulary for feelings he already had. Bartkus didn't attack the clinic because he genuinely wanted to minimize suffering. He did it because after his friend's suicide, he no longer saw any reason to keep living himself. In other words, Bartkus could not find what David Benatar would call as terrestrial meaning. And this is where nihilism enters. If this was an act of nihilism, it can't be called antinatalism at all. We also have direct evidence from his own audio. I won't share it here, but in that audio, he mentions his intentions behind his bombing, and it was not to reduce suffering or prevent births. He talks about wanting to die in a way that would get people to pay attention to antinatalism and aphilism. And yes, people are paying attention, but not in the way he hoped. He partially succeeded in getting the attention, but what kind of attention? Antinatalism would be looked more of a radical fringe terrorist ideology than it was. It is only going to get negative publicity. All those philosophers who have been spending their energy on splitting hair on the minutest nuances of their arguments will be ignored even more. Those who play the role of explaining those arguments will not be heard or rejected because someone bombed an IVF clinic in the name of antinatalism. Bartkus had other choices. He could have done what Raphael Samuel did, a media stunt that went viral. Raphael was mocked, sure. I don't agree with everything that he says, but he made people think. Or look at Stop Having Kids, a group doing compassionate, consistent activism in public spaces. There's so much you can do. Make videos, join conversations, read, learn, create, design placards, hand out flyers, talk to people. The mere act of telling people about the lack of cosmic meaning to this whole circus of life can give meaning to your life. You don't have to use violence for that. Guy Bartkus is gone now, and it's tragic. Not just because of what he did, but because of why he did it. But I wish those who feel like him channelize their feelings through thought rather than through terror. Benatar's reaction. The Times magazine published David Benatar's reaction to this. Benatar said Bartkus's crime only proved his argument that our earthly existence leads to suffering. If his parents had not brought him into the world, there would not be this misery, he said. His actions underscore my point. While Benatar believes it is immoral to have children only to condemn them to the inevitable misery, he said he rejects pro-mortalism, a separate and more pessimistic philosophy than antinatalism. While I do think it's a harm to come into existence, it is also a harm to die or to be killed, and I'm opposed to acts of terror. Antinatalism is being searched more and more on the internet and being talked and discussed more in the public discourse. Benatar attributes this uptake to several factors, including the climate crisis and perceptions about the world getting worse. But Benatar does not think that is the case. He says the world is not either uniformly improving or uniformly getting worse. It gets better in some ways and worse in others. However, it is never going to be good enough for us to think that bringing somebody into existence is not a harm. The article concludes with Benatar's advice, which is in complete contradiction to what Bartkus did. His advice to those who do exist is to do no harm to other human beings or animals and to get the joy you can and give the joy that you can give. In other news, Philosophy and Phenomenological Research is a philosophy journal. In its latest issue was an article by Andrea Sauchelli, Axiological Pessimism, Procreation and Collective Responsibility. The article starts with a strong pessimistic note. Pointless, cruel, and unbearable suffering is a characterizing feature of human existence. Andrea evaluates the badness or disvalue and goodness or value of human existence. He rejects David Benatar's axiological asymmetry and provides another means to reach antinatalism. David Benatar had used a person-affecting view, that is, from the point of view of the person who may come into existence. Andrea, on the other hand, uses an impersonal view, which is evaluation of state of affairs. Secondly, his argument is on a collective species level. He evaluates whether it would be good or bad state of affairs if human species continue to exist or not. The implication of that is then on individual procreation. Axiological pessimism. There are many types of pessimism, but the one used in this paper is that according to which the overall disvalue of human existence exceeds its value, where the overall disvalue of human existence may be grounded in the fact that it is bad for us to have existed and exist either individually or as a species. That disvalue of human existence comes from badness of human existence for humans. Andrea says this is sufficient to say that human existence is bad, not just for humans, but bad in itself. In other words, a world containing human existence is bad. This pessimism is assumed. The main purpose of this paper is not to directly defend these views, but rather to explore their consequences for the antinatalist debate. So, given this pessimism, what can we say about antinatalism? From pessimism to antinatalism. Given the pessimism, it could seem like antinatalism follows automatically. If human existence is bad, then we ought not to continue the human species. So, having children cannot be permissible in such a case. Antinatalism achieved, case closed. But it is not that straightforward. Andrea cites another paper called Pessimism and Procreation by Daniel Pallis, where Daniel claims that there are scenarios where procreation is still permissible even when we accept the broader pessimism. On this view, we are permitted to harm someone if they approve of that harm. So long as the future people approve of bringing them into existence, we should be allowed to have them. It seems permissible to harm someone to the extent that we have reasons to believe that the affected persons would reasonably approve of it. Daniel Pallis provides an analogy. Your wife is fast asleep and you want to wake her up to show her a funny position in which your newborn is sleeping, despite the fact that it would very likely be better to let her rest without interruption. You can wake her up on the condition that she then approves your action. One flaw in this analogy is that your wife already exists and might have an interest in being shown her baby sleeping in a funny position. But in case of procreation, the person does not exist and has no interests whatsoever. This distinction between starting a new life and continuing an existing one is shown by David Benatar. David Benatar provides a solution to the question of starting a new life with his axiological asymmetry. Following that asymmetry, a life which is full of bliss with only a trivial harm, like say headache for a few minutes only once in the entire span of that life, is still not worth starting. Andrea finds this implausible. According to him, a blissful life does seem to be worth starting, and that there is at least a defeasible moral reason for creating such a life at no cost. So he rejects the asymmetry, saying it is neither sufficiently justified nor intuitively appealing, especially if you see its most extreme consequences. The question after rejecting Benatar's asymmetry is, given the pessimism of human existence and given the overriding reason to have children on the basis that they will still approve of our action, can we still go to the antinatalist conclusion? We need an overriding reason to not have children, even if they might approve our action of having them. If we can show that the disvalue of human existence is so great that no amount of value ever can outweigh it, then that might lead us to such an overriding reason. Disvalue and evils. The evaluation of human existence in terms of disvalue and value is not a simple arithmetic. That's because not all goods are equally good and not all bads are equally bad. If we compare two good things, one might be strongly preferable to the other. Like, for example, the pleasure of scratching one's head is of a kind that any amount is yet inferior to the joy of experiencing one's child succeeding in their life. The same is the case with bad things. Some bad things are so bad that even a single occurrence is better to be avoided. Singular occurrence of severe torture in one's life is worse than any number of very mild discomforts to one's little finger. It doesn't seem unreasonable to prefer even an infinite number of instances of stiffness in one's finger to one instance of severe torture. And on similar lines, there are some bads such that even a single occurrence of those bads is enough to outweigh all the multiple occurrences of goods. He calls such bads as supreme evils. The idea is that occurrences of supreme evil are such that no number of instances of kinds of positive value currently available to humanity would be sufficient to compensate in value for them. He gives some real world examples of such supreme evils only from recent history. Even within exclusively the past century or so, we can find likely candidates in a series of horrific events: the Holocaust, the Holodomor, the Bucha massacre, the atrocities committed in Mali by members of Wagner Group, the Atari Market massacre, the Haas refugee camp bombing, the Katyn massacre, the atrocities committed on Finnish children in Finnish Lapland of Soviet partisans, and so on. These evils were enacted by those who believed in some utopian end results which will compensate those evils. But no matter how good an ideological cause may appear to be to its supporters, the evil of torture, starving children, and maiming innocent human beings cannot be outweighed by the alleged goodness of a purported future utopian society or the restoration of national pride. Any one of those supreme evils is sufficient in disvalue to outweigh any number of goods, and so we should stop future supreme evils from happening. The normative implications of this view entail that we may have increasingly strong reasons to halt further occurrences of evil, despite the fact that the past has already ensured the overall irremediable badness of human existence. From evil to antinatalism, our collective duty to stop procreation. The mere possibility of such supreme evil, according to Andrea, provides us a reason to make sure human species don't continue. That in turn gives us that overriding reason to not have children, even if they were to approve of our actions. The risk of exposing our children to a supreme evil, given the magnitude of its badness, can be a sufficient defeater of their likely future consent to being created. The evil that our children may directly generate or to which they may causally contribute. Andrea draws a formal argument which states that we have a collective responsibility of stopping procreation. Note that this is a stronger claim than individual non procreation. Here, we have a collective responsibility, almost a duty, to make sure human existence is brought to an end. Objections and conclusion. Andrea also considers some objections. One is that if we stop procreation, then a rapidly aging population will go through a lot of suffering. There would be fewer people able to take care of childless population, fewer laborers producing goods in the workforce, fewer leaders capable of running the functional society, and so on. But he says even if the aging population would suffer in enduring the gradual depopulation of our planet, entailing loss of comfort and meaning in their lives, stopping procreation would still likely produce a better outcome than the alternative. That alternative being supreme evils in the future. Secondly, we may also have an auxiliary duty of ensuring that the gradual depopulation of our planet takes place in a manner that it is as painless as possible, or at least as devoid of further supreme evils as possible. He concludes by stating that refraining from procreation compatible with the duty of minimizing the occurrences of supreme evils is arguably the most compelling means of achieving this imperfect duty of beneficence. There was a Stop Having Kids outreach in Warsaw, Poland by a group called Negative Utilitarian Society. They have put a video similar to what Nimrod does, only this time the placards are in Polish. I spoke to one of the organizers of this event, Jakub Henzel, and this is what he had to say. Okay, so the recording has started. So, hello, Jakub. I came to know that you had done a very good outreach of Stop Having Kids in Warsaw, Poland last weekend. And I was curious to know what happened, how did it go, many different things. So, do you want to just give a summary of what had happened?
Yeah, thank you, Tejas. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I am Jakub. I am a vegan activist. I am also a antinatalist, an ethicist. And actually, in last week, last Saturday, it was on May 17 in Warsaw, we had Stop Having Kids antinatalist demonstration organized by the Negative Utilitarian Society. And 13 people participated in this event, although we originally expected even more people, even somewhere around 20. Unfortunately, on Saturday in Warsaw, the weather was absolutely terrible at first. But anyway, in the terms of number of participants, it was still, as far as I know, the largest antinatalist demonstration in Poland so far. All the demonstrators were vegan. Almost all of them were vegan activists, active vegan activists. Most of them are affiliated with the Anonymous for the Voiceless, including myself, and most of them, as far as I know, were either atheists or sentiocentric antinatalists. But there were also a few people who are only for the human extinction, against human procreation only. Uh, Formally, I was the organizer, and Tom, my friend Tom, you spoken with, was the second organizer. And demonstration was pretty long. It lasted for about 4 hours, and it went pretty well. As most of us are affiliated with Anonymous for the Voiceless, so we decided to do this demonstration in the style of Cube of Truth. That is, at first, two people were standing their backs to each other on the sidewalk, holding posters, and the rest of us were doing outreach with people who are intrigued or who are curious by our signs and slogans. But yeah, if when eventually more people joined and we have more equipment, we changed this arrangement a bit. And yeah, there was even like a funny situation because at one point there was a Christian demonstration that went next to us with their slogans, like "the God loves you" and other pro-life signs. So it was a little funny because on the one side of the street you have antinatalists demonstrating, and on the other there were Christians with pro-life signs. But there were no beef or disputes between us. Yeah, overall, the demonstration was peaceful and the police watched over the safety of the.
Oh, that's very good. So the signs that you had, were they? I saw one placard, one poster placard, which was in English, but rest of them, were they all in Polish or they were other languages?
Yeah, I think we have maybe one or two in English, but the rest of them were in Polish, yes. If you and your viewers are curious what was the meaning of these signs, I can translate.
Yeah, if you can just, tell a few of them, and then what they meant.
Yeah, we have signs like contraceptions prevents abortion, adoptions instead of procreation. There was a sign, don't play roulette with someone else's life. You don't have to procreate to have a family. And we have like, no life deserves to suffer, no life deserves to coming into existence. And also, coming into existence is the cause of suffering, and the extinction is the solution to the problem. So that's what was on our sides.
That's very good. And in terms of the reactions of people, like, did you meet many people who were either for or against what you're saying? Or how was the reaction of people around?
Well, as for the reactions of people in general, they were generally positive or at least neutral, which was not that much of surprise to me because we had in last year in November and December three similar demonstrations, and the reactions was pretty similar. Most of the people who approach us for a conversation were clearly intrigued by the slogans, our signs, and we then explained to them what our event was about. I witnessed twice a situation where the young people, seeing our signs, they immediately figured out that it was some sort of antinatalist demonstration. So yeah, they were familiar with the term and they were aware of it. However, most of people were not familiar with the term. antinatalism. So we have to explain it to them. But as I said, there were no hostile or aggressive reactions. Although my friend had like maybe two negative reactions where people suggested that we are crazy, we are loony, or proposing absurd solutions.
Hmm.
As for me, I think in most of my conversations, people at least agreed that there are too many people in the world right now, and signs like adoption or foster care instead of procreation. But they also almost all of them thought that our proposal our proposal for total extinction was too extreme and too radical, because there are some good things or pleasures in lives besides of suffering. So yes.
Oh, that's very good. At least nobody told you to kill yourselves, which is a good thing.
Yes, maybe. Yes, I never heard this at the event, but I don't know what my friends was hearing, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
By the way, this was organized by this new Negative Utilitarian Society. What could you tell us about that?
Yes, the Negative Utilitarian Society. The Negative Utilitarian Society is like an international network of activists that support and organize actions or outreaches and events about veganism, antinatalism, atheism, science, philosophy, and critical thinking. And we oppose suffering of all sentient beings, not only domesticated animals, but also wild animals, also humans. And we try to promote public awareness around these topics and support organizations and campaigns that operate at least in one of these fields. So if, for example, we support Anonymous for the Voiceless, as most of us are activists for AV, and we provide information about ethics of negative utilitarianism, about contraception, abortion, adoption, foster care, animal rights, the conditions of animals in animal industry or in nature. And whenever is possible, we actively try to avoid the creation of suffering. For example, by supporting local pigeon initiatives that swap eggs, or by helping people with a child wish to adopt or foster a child. We
And what?
also Yes.
No, sorry, go ahead.
We also, as a society, as a group, we protest like legislation and practices that oppose those goals, such as environmentalism, species conservation efforts, some religious dogmas, and generally this pro-life approach in politics and in the social life.
Right. Very good. And is this like in Poland only? Like, where was this founded?
Right now, it's more like informal organization. What we have plans in the nearest future to actually register it. We don't know yet where. Maybe in Poland, maybe in Germany. But right now, we gather activists mostly from Poland and Germany.
Oh, that's very good. Interesting. And I hope it goes to many other countries. And I hope you have more outreaches like these in the future. Are there any plans for that? Like, are you going to have more of them?
Yes, as for plans for the future, we are definitely planning doing more this sort of antinatalist street demonstration. And as far as I know, most of the participants of this last week Saturday's demonstration liked that very much, and I think we will do at least a few more of such a demonstration in the summer during the vacation season, perhaps in Warsaw or maybe in some other Polish cities or in Germany as well. But even though for now these events in Poland, may seem a bit symbolic in nature, and more that it's showing that yes, indeed, there are natalists and they are actually exist, but it is quite possible that we may start doing these street outreaches regularly in the not so distant future.
That's very good. Looking forward for more of them and let us know what happens and then we'll meet again.
Thanks. Yes.
Thanks, Jakub.
Thank you, Tejas. Thank you for having me.
This is a great start for a nascent group, and I hope there are many more to come. Speaking of Stop Having Kids, there are two different interviews on the YouTube channel of Stop Having Kids. One was with a young lady who wanted to have children later in her life but not immediately. A more interesting interview was with a well informed couple who were planning on having children, starting a family, so to speak. The way Dietz asked questions, brought them to express themselves, made them curious about his views about antinatalism was very interesting. And more interestingly, he never said the word antinatalism. I'm not sure if this was on purpose or by accident. I remember a while back there was this movement within the vegan movement to not say the V word. I don't know if Dietz is following that idea in his interviews about the A word, but maybe we'll know as more of these interviews come up. One of the many arguments for having children is that if you don't have children, who will care for you in your old age? And even though this is much more common in Eastern cultures, the argument is not unknown globally. Even the likes of Jordan Peterson have invoked this to show a pretense of sympathy for someone dying alone because they didn't have children. But how true is this argument? Even if we set aside the ethical problem with using children as your walking stick, what are the chances that they will actually care for you? The situation is in fact quite the opposite. The Print, which is a very well established media website in India, had an article, India's seniors are facing abuse in families, children are no longer Shravan Kumar. The article talks about both anecdotal examples of children abandoning their parents without any support, as well as a bunch of statistical data showing this trend. One interesting thing is the photo of an old age home in Delhi. Elderly residents are sitting in front of a mural of a mythological figure called Shravan Kumar. Shravan Kumar is the famous son in Indian mythology who carries his blind father and mother in two baskets on side of a pole on his shoulders. He takes them to pilgrimages and holy sites to fulfill their spiritual desires. Eventually, he gets killed while serving his parents. This moral virtue of being a servant to one's parents is deeply embedded in Indian culture, so much so that it also forms a justification to have children. Children should serve their parents, therefore, I am entitled to being served by my children, and therefore, I should have children, is the circular logic. This is similar to the circular logic of mother cows in some Hindus. I drink cow's milk, so cow is my mother, and since cow is my mother, I am entitled to her milk. Anyway, coming back to the article in Print, it was not about antinatalism per se, but it was definitely a reminder of how feeble the argument for having children as an old age insurance scheme really is. Those were some of the stories for antinatalism this week. Before I finish, I want to reiterate the violence such as what Bartkus did has no place in antinatalism. It would have been better if his parents had not brought him into existence, both for himself and for the world.